Greetings. My name is Jared Fields. I am the chairman of the Mirror 100 Mentor Program for the 100 Black Men of South Metro Atlanta. We would like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here tonight to speak with us for this dynamic conversation. I wouldn't be able to run this program without the leadership of our president, Rafiq Ahmad, and our co-chairman as well, Dr. LaDre Gilbert. Tonight, we have a great program in store for you. You will hear from some dynamic speakers for our law and community seminar. The speakers that we have for tonight will be President Rafiq Ahmad of the 100 Black Men of South Metro Atlanta. We have Attorney Sean Shaw and also Broward County State Attorney Harold Pryor. We will have another additional guest that will be joining us later, which will be the Assistant County Attorney for DeKalb County, Brother Amari Crawford. How's everyone doing today? I hope everyone's doing well.
Yes, sir.
We would like to go ahead and get started, and I would like everybody to please give their self introduction. Again, we have President Rafiq Ahmad for the 100 Black Men of South Metro Atlanta, and he's also the executive director of the 100 Black Men of America. We will ask him to go first, followed by Attorney Sean Shaw, and then lastly, Broward County State Attorney Harold Pryor.
Well, good evening. I hope everyone is doing exceptionally well. I'm glad to be a part of this panel with the other esteemed guests. As Brother Fields said, I currently serve as the president of 100 Black Men of South Metro Atlanta, simultaneously serving as the executive director for the 100 Black Men National Office. By way of background, I am a 34-year veteran, retired from the U.S. government. I worked as a federal agent, retiring as a special agent in charge in December of 2021. Oh, I would also say, Brother Jared, that
Hello, is everyone there? Can everyone hear me?
yes, sir. This particular topic is something that is actually very close to me. I'm the immediate past president of the National Association of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and the Law in Your Community is a staple program that we've actually presented across the country for a number of years now. And the intent of that program is to teach citizens about their rights and to bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement.
Awesome. I think I am supposed to go next. I am Sean Shaw. I'm honored to be with you all today. I am actually in Tampa, Florida right now. I grew up in Tallahassee, Florida, and went to college at Princeton University and went to the University of Florida for law school and practiced some law. And then I got involved in some state government things. And then I was honored to be elected to the Florida House of Representatives. And after that, I was honored to be the first Black nominee for Attorney General in the history of the state of Florida. And after that, I, continued doing other things in the community, worked for Swope Redante law firm here in Florida. But this is a topic that I think is very interesting. Certainly the intersection of law and politics and law enforcement is an important one, certainly considering what kind of atmosphere we live in here and what's going on around the country. Our communities look to us specifically for these sorts of intersections and answers. So I'm happy to be here and look forward to it.
All right, I guess I'm next. Last but not least, first and foremost, thank you all for having me. Thank you to the 100 Black Men of South Metro Atlanta Incorporated. I also am in Florida, but I stand in solidarity with my brothers in Georgia. You guys are doing a great job up here. You're setting an example and a standard for how we should be doing things down here in Florida. To give you my background, I am an attorney. I went to undergrad at the University of Florida. Then left the University of Florida and then went to Nova and graduated from Nova Southeastern University College of Law. After that, I served as an assistant state attorney, which is a prosecutor, the equivalent of a assistant district attorney, I believe that you call in Georgia. Served there. Then I went into private practice, ultimately becoming a assistant general counsel, where I negotiated business deals for a multi-million-dollar telecommunications company. Thereafter, the position of state attorney, the chief prosecutor, the chief law enforcement officer in Broward County opened up. I put my hat in the race. I won a 9-person primary and then ultimately won the general election with 64% of the vote. Therefore, making me the one of 3 black state attorneys in the history of the state of Florida, but also making me the first black man to be elected state attorney in the entire state of Florida. So I'm truly standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm looking forward to this discussion because this issue, the issues that we're going to discuss, are the reasons why I went for state attorney. Growing up in a world, in a country where black men were viewed less than because of the color of their skin, and we ultimately or oftentimes have negative interactions with law enforcement. And so I became a prosecutor because of my passion of bridging that gap, but also ensuring that we have a system that's fair to people that look just like me. And so I look forward to this discussion. I look forward to entertaining any questions that anyone may have for us tonight.
Wow. Again, I'm glad that everyone was able to come on tonight and speak because, again, I think that everyone needs to hear from you and like to hear your perspective from your experience, of course, in the law field. Let's get right into it. So I'm gonna ask you all, just kind of in general, what made you interested in law? Like, what was your biggest influence? How did you end up saying law is the area that I wanted to pursue? Anybody can go ahead and start. It doesn't matter.
I guess I'll jump in since I was last, and then we'll work our way back to the beginning. Um, the reason why I ran and the reason why I got into law, many people that go into law, a lot of their motivations is to become rich, right?
Yep.
Legal field, right? I want to be rich. I want to drive a nice car. I want a big house. To be honest with you, and I know it might sound cliche or like I'm running from Mr. Congeniality or to win the Mr. Beauty Pageant of America. Really, I really got into law enforcement. I got into the law was because I saw how my friends were being treated. I saw my family members were being treated negatively in the law enforcement industry, not just by police officers, but the criminal justice system. I had family members who were victims in the criminal justice system, and I saw prosecutors not even care about their case because they were black. Oh, he was a crackhead, or oh, he had a mental health issue, so we don't care, right? Or you'd have family members who had mental health issues or drug addiction issues, and the criminal justice system didn't care about that. They just lumped them in that category of criminal, bad person, rather than address the cause of their issue. And so that was my motivation. I went to law school to get into criminal law. I went into law school because I really wanted to change the system. I really believed that I could change the system from within. I still believe that, even though it's hard at times to believe that. But that's why I got into the legal profession, because I was passionate about it, because I saw people who looked like me were being mistreated.
Yeah, I got into law to help people, not to become rich and have the nice house like the state attorney said. But my hero was my father growing up, and my father was the first black Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court. And so growing up with that in your household is probably no surprise that I ended up going into the law. It might be a surprise that I don't want to be a judge, but my father was the first black lots of things in Duval County, assistant state attorney, assistant public defender. He did a lot of things. And when you grow up in a house like that, public service becomes sort of second nature. And so I always wanted to do that. He was the example I was following. It's why I got into the law. It's why I got into politics. It's why I continue to do this. It's the thing that drives me to do it. And it's just second nature because it is what you grew up with. So he was an immense influence on me. His rulings from the bench and the way he conducted himself, the public service he engaged in. A lot of us need, I think, more of the fact that public service is such a good thing to do because it's the right thing to do. And so I got into public service for that. And that was the inspiration that pushed me to where we are today.
Yeah, I think my story is similar to State Attorney Pryor's. Um, I can remember a specific incident that actually didn't drive me into law enforcement, but it actually helped me to choose my field of study in college. And during that particular incident, a friend of mine and I were stopped by what we thought was a police officer. It ended up being probably about a half a dozen police officers for what was a simple, or should have been a simple, traffic stop. And I walked away from that incident feeling that my rights had been violated in some way, but I wasn't quite sure how. And as a result of that, that became something that I became curious about when I began my collegiate career, and I started to take classes in criminal justice. And as those classes evolved, or as I evolved in those classes, I began to take more and more, and actually ended up majoring in criminal justice, and eventually stumbled into the Department of Justice. And as I saw, how I could possibly impact things going forward, then I decided to pursue law enforcement as a career, with the idea of being able to change those things that I saw and things that happened to me, just to be a positive impact on other young African Americans that I may come in contact with. So that's kind of how I stumbled into my career field, which, like I said, 34 years later, ended up being something that I combined, with the work that I do with the 100, as far as in the mentoring space, by being able to try to positively impact those young men and women that I came in contact with through my work, and ultimately evolve that into being able to teach folks in our communities about their rights, and how to ensure that your rights are not violated, and then go a step further. If your rights are violated, then you would be hopefully going to see Mr. Shaw, Mr. Pryor, to find out what could be done, to correct that.
Wow, again, all inspirational. My next question is going to be, what advances have you seen in the community as far as law is concerned, or what are still some of the setbacks we had? I know this could kind of be a loaded question because, again, we are still dealing with stuff that we shouldn't be dealing with. But what is some of the things that you've seen that has changed for the better, and what are some things that are still kind of lacking behind? We can start back with you, President Mott.
Obviously, some of the things that have changed is that we have the advantage of technology now that we didn't have in the 60s. So the odd thing about what we're talking about now in 2022 is that some of these things are things that Brother Shaw's father probably spoke about years ago, because the more things change in some regards, they stay the same. So obviously we have advanced, in the status of African Americans in this country, serving and holding public offices and holding high offices. But in some regards, some of the things as far as the way, that African Americans are viewed and then subsequently treated, are similar to what we would have seen or read about, in a Jim Crow era. So the reform, police reform is something that's a necessity. It ties into the idea that we have to vote and make sure that we put people, like Mr. Pryor, in office, so that we can actually see those changes, that we want. So motivating our young people to make sure that they're, not feeling a sense of apathy when it comes to elections, and understanding that elections have consequences, is something that can move us towards reform. So, technology, there's certain, laws that have changed, but we still have a ways to go. I think that one of our impediments is just a cultural perception, of African Americans versus white Americans, in this country, and I think that is, sometimes drives the responses of law enforcement officers, both black and white, and ultimately end up in kind of what we see as situations that start off bad, and so they end up worse. In some cases, just because of the way that African Americans are viewed, and what's seemingly an inherent fear that people have of even in approaching us. So we have definitely have had some advances, but we have a long way to go, and the citizens have a lot to do with how we get there.
Yeah, that's about the same answer I would want to give. After we had a 2-term African American president of the United States, I think a lot of us thought maybe we had gotten past some things when in fact we are now in an era where we have, I think, reverted to a place that was that is very 60, 70-ish in terms of how people interact with each other, specifically how Black protest is viewed, and how those of us who believe that maybe Black Lives Matter and what that statement means and how it is reacted to. Like, there's lots of things going on that we thought we had been past. The voting rights and how voting is handled federally and in the state. These are issues that we thought we had handled and been done with. But, Black lawyers, fairly or unfairly, we have a kind of special extra thing that goes on when you're a Black lawyer in your community. You've got a little bit extra on you, which is fine, but you've got a little bit of, you're not just a lawyer for a law firm, or you're not just a lawyer for a company. Your community depends on you to give sound counsel, to be involved in the community, to be someone who is active in all spaces. And so that is something that I see coming back. Certainly the groups of the voluntary bar association that are like, the groups of Black lawyers in certain towns, I have noticed that they have become much more active in the community around these sorts of issues because they have to be, because the community is demanding that lawyers get more active and be more socially conscious and socially aware and socially involved in their community. And I've noticed that lawyers have kind of heeded that call and gotten more involved in their local community. So I've definitely noticed that. But you touched on something, President Ahmad, that's important, and I think is making sure that people that look like us run for everything. We need Black public defenders. We need Black state attorneys. We need Black judges. We need Black police chiefs. We need Black sheriffs. We need Black people everywhere on both sides. And so, I believe Brother Pryor here has one of the toughest jobs as someone who enforces the law in his own community. And I know for a fact that it is hard on him in terms of how he interacts with his community, being the chief person that puts people in jail. But he's going to do a better, more sensitive job of it than someone maybe that does not look like him. All four of us as Black men, I don't have to know your background. I know we have all had strange interactions with law enforcement. And I think that sensitivity is something that is needed in these positions. Someone who's had that bad experience, or someone who knows what it feels like to be pulled over at night. Someone who has had the back of your neck hair stand up when you get those lights behind you. That diversity needs to exist everywhere as a law enforcement officer, as a prosecutor, as a defender. And I think it makes the whole system work better when people are sensitive to these different issues. Because listen, I don't want to walk into the courtroom and just see Black defendants and that's the only Black people I see. And so we got to work on that representation too, because that diversity matters as well. That's why Florida is so proud of Brother Pryor here, because it's important that we are represented on all sides of that spectrum.
Well, I thank you, Brother Shaw, and thank you, President Ahmad. Brother Shaw, you're one of the reasons why I ran. Brother Shaw ran a spirited and competitive race statewide in Florida for Attorney General. And I think he was one of the sparks for me that said, okay, you got to do it on the small scale, right? Broward County is the second largest county in Florida. And it was terrible in the sense that we're the second largest county in the state of Florida, one of the highest Black populations in the state, if not the highest Florida Black metropolitan area. But all of our constitutional officers, our public defender was white, our state attorney was white, our sheriff was white. And so many of us stepped up to the plate because we saw that sense of urgency that President Ahmad spoke to, Shaw spoke to, of us Black people getting in these positions of power. Of these institutions that affect our lives, that affect our everyday lives, right? How has it gotten better? It's gotten better in the sense that now we have more Black attorneys and more Black men and women who want to go into law enforcement, who want to be police officers, who want to be district attorneys, prosecutors who want to be public defenders. We have more of us that are willing to jump in and make that sacrifice for public service because, as Brother Shaw spoke, we've all been in that situation where we've been pulled over, or a cop or police officer pulls up behind us and we're not even riding dirty, but we're afraid of what could happen, right? Hell, I'm the chief law enforcement officer in my county, and just the other day I'm driving home from work and a police officer pulled behind me and I got nervous, right? I have nothing to be nervous about. It's a real thing. And I think that's why it's important that we have people of color in positions of power that understands our communities, that can really deal with these issues in our communities with a level of care, but also be able to hold people in our community accountable. Who better to lead in prosecution than a Black man or a Black woman, right? Who better to be a chief of a police agency or sheriff of a police agency than a Black man or a Black woman? Because one, we can see past the BS. Two, we can hold people accountable when they do wrong, but also we can treat everyone fairly and not base it on the color of someone's skin. And so I think it's important that we have representation. And I think that's one of the ways it's gotten better, is that there are more of us in these industries, more of us in these institutions. However, how it's gotten worse is because many people in our society, I won't say any names, I won't point to a particular group, they feel that they're losing their majority. And so because they feel that they're losing their majority, or that their back is to the wall, or they've been backed to a corner, now they've become a lot more brazen in their actions and their words towards people of color, people that don't look like them, people that may not come from the same backgrounds as them. And that's what we've been dealing with. We've been in a heightened racialized society because of their fears, because of their misunderstanding, because of their lack of education and willingness to reach out and see us as just basic human beings. And so that's what we're up against when dealing with these different institutions.
So you all hit it dead on the head. The idea about being pulled over and those hairs sticking up on the back of your neck. I'm not sure what the real term for it is, but that is a very real thing. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Attorney Shaw. And also, I want to ask you a follow-up question. What was the atmosphere like growing up in the household with your father? Like, how was that dynamic? I guess from the outside looking in and from you living actually in the household, like how was that dynamic growing up in that household? And and then of course I'm assuming you probably realized who your father was probably about high school age, I would assume, or maybe middle school. But like, how was it growing up in that household?
That's a good question. You don't get away with much. You don't get away with much when you're Supreme Court justice. That's right. I knew he was a big deal. I didn't realize how big until probably college or law school. But I knew that he had a big time job. I just did not know that it was that big. And I will tell you, it's relevant to this discussion. All of us have had the talk, right? All of us have had someone tell you when you get pulled over by police, where to look, how to look, what eye contact to do, how you make movements, how slow to move. And I had that talk. I used to tell this story on the campaign trail. We've all had that talk. The difference was when my father gave me the talk, he was the Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court. And it didn't matter who he was. What mattered was that I was a Black boy and had just got my driver's license. And he knew that he needed to tell me how to interact with police. And that is at the core of kind of what we're dealing with here, is that some of us got to have the talk and some of us don't. All of us need to not have to have that talk, is what I think we're trying to work at. So it was a household certainly of those sorts of things and interactions. And, then I went to law school and it became clear that he was a bigger deal than even I had understood. But it's things you pick up on that you don't even realize you're picking up on when you live there.
Thank you, because I think I was just, a lot of us were curious about how that was, growing up, because essentially you grew up with a legend, right? And as you're in school going through your motions as a kid, you think, whatever, I know you got a job or whatever, but I can't imagine when the light bulb went off in college and the law school, like, wait a minute, are y'all talking about who I grew up in the house with? Like,
I was on the bench when Bush v. Gore happened right when I was in college and law school, and he was on the Supreme Court then, and that is kind of when it was like, okay, this is a big all right, this is a big deal. That's kind of when the light bulb went off, right?
Okay. Also, we have who was able to join us, Attorney Amari Crawford. I would like for you to give your introduction. I don't know if you know which title you want to go by, but I would like for you to give your introduction as well, and then I have a follow-up question with you all, with you as well, to kind of tie you in to catch you up with our current discussion.
All right. Thank you very much for allowing me to join you all. I apologize for my tardiness. As you guys are probably aware, we have a very important race in Georgia that's going to a runoff with our current Senator Raphael Warnock. So we had an event for him, and I didn't expect there to be a runoff, so I committed to join you all prior to the campaign event. So I apologize for my tardiness. As Jared said, yes, I am Omari Crawford. I'm an attorney with the DeKalb County Law Department. Prior to joining DeKalb County, I worked for a private firm for about 6 years. So altogether, I have 10 years worth of litigation experience. And I was just recently elected as the state representative for Georgia's 84th House District. So thank you for allowing me to speak with you all. And I'm waiting to hear some good things and join in some good conversations. So thanks.
Wow. And again, congratulations on your race. And again, as you said, you had some things to do before you got on with your new elected position. So we totally understand. But the follow-up question that I have for you is, what is the influence? Like what made you interested in law to pursue law, to say, you know what, I want to get my law degree, et cetera, and kind of like that? Can you kind of speak about that?
Sure. In undergrad, I thought I wanted to get a PhD, and I became exposed to the law through two ways. One, through a book that I read, a James Baldwin book. And in his book, he discussed the importance of Black people, particularly being involved in politics and in the law. And I'm paraphrasing this quote. What he's saying is, under no circumstance should a white man be more entitled or more capable of writing the laws by which I am to be governed by. I should be able to write my own laws, is what James Baldwin was essentially saying in his book. And I took that to heart and realized the power that people who are able to draft laws or practice laws have, and how they can serve people who look like them, because a lot of Black people, let's just be real, don't go to law school. But even more importantly, a lot of Black people do not have access to lawyers that look like them. So that was important to me. That dream became a reality. I was given an internship with a judge in DeKalb County, my hometown. And so I had the chance to see the law unfold and had an opportunity to meet practitioners of the law. So that let me know that I could do it, gave me the confidence to go forward to law school, because we hear these things all the time about how difficult law school is. But after seeing them doing it, I gained that confidence that I can do it. And then I had a heightened interest in the law. And so that's the reason why I became an attorney. And in short, just to serve people who look like me.
Yeah, that is generally the answer that I got. The ending part is helping people who look like us, helping people to navigate these waters in law. There's a lot of things that our culture and our society doesn't know, that we should know, things like that. And unfortunately, you have people who abuse the law, and they will use what you don't know against you. So it's just great to hear that everybody pretty much is on the same wavelength and the same path. I have specific questions for State Attorney Pryor and President Ahmad. How important is it? And if, of course, everybody else have something to add, they can add. But specifically to you two, how important is it for members of law enforcement and law in the legal community to build those relationships with community, with our community, and et cetera?
It's important. It's necessary. And I think even now, law enforcement agencies are realizing that in order to be effective cops, in order to be effective law enforcement officers in their respective communities, they better damn well develop a strong relationship with the communities that they're patrolling, and that they're serving. Um, there have been so many instances or incidences that have occurred throughout this country where we see that there was a lack of police and community involvement, and because of that, it proved to be detrimental. Right? Um, I find, in my experience as chief law enforcement officer, or the chief prosecutor here in Broward County, those law enforcement agencies, and there are about 32 or 31 municipalities in Broward County, and there are about 18 law enforcement agencies, and then the sheriff's office covers the other 16 or 17. Um, the more effective law enforcement agencies are the ones that are involved in the communities, are not just the patrolmen or patrolwomen who, clock in, patrol the neighborhoods that they don't live in, that they wouldn't want to be caught dead in on their day off, right? But they're spending time there, getting to know the people, walking the streets, sitting down on porches, talking with the people that live there, hanging out with the children there, really getting to know them by name, and so that they know them as well. And I find that those law enforcement agencies, they deal with the controversial issues much better than those law enforcement agencies that haven't bridged that gap. And so now it's important. Now, law enforcement agencies who really never saw the value in it, now they value it even more because they understand that if we build those relationships, we can avoid something even more serious happening, right? We actually can sit down at the table and have the necessary discussions that need to be had. And so it's important, it's imperative that our law enforcement agencies build those relationships, bridge those gaps. But also, it doesn't stop there. It's important for prosecutors, district attorneys around the country, to build relationships. The first time a child, a black boy or a black girl, sees a prosecutor, it should be in a court when they're either in trouble or they're a witness of a crime or a victim of a crime. They should see us in the classrooms teaching them about the legal system, letting them know our jobs and functions as prosecutors, but also educating them on the function of law enforcement in our institution. So it doesn't just start or stop there with law enforcement. Also, we need our prosecutors to get out there and touch the people, get to know the people, let them know that we're not here to just throw people in jail. Part of my job, 90% of my job, is to rebrand or to reimagine what the criminal justice system is, but the role and the duties of a prosecutor. My job, whenever I speak to young black kids or people in our community, is not just to throw people in prison. My job is to keep you safe. My job is to ensure that we can give you second chances. And also, a part of my job is to hold people accountable if, in fact, they do break the law. Sometimes that may be us putting someone in prison, or sometimes that may be us giving someone a second chance by putting them in a diversion program. But we really have to let people know that we're not the boogeyman. We're here to keep you safe. We're actually here to protect you.
Wow,
Yeah.
and I think that's a good. It's good. I agree with everything you're saying. I'm from South Florida. I'm from West Palm originally. Well, Riviera Beach. You're from South Florida. You know about Riviera. So yeah, I'm from Riviera Beach originally. So I can't imagine how things in the community could have changed because I've growing up in just South Florida. Period. It doesn't have to be West Palm Beach. It could be Fort Lauderdale, Pompano. All of Broward County, of course. A lot of stuff happens. A lot of stuff could also be prevented if I feel like those relationships were there. One of my main things that happened with me, one of my first interactions, I have two of them, but the main one I'm going to bring up, again, me and my friends were easily maybe middle school age, probably 8th grade, I'm pretty sure. And we were just standing outside of his house, just in a group, standing outside, weren't doing nothing, was just minding our business. And a patrol car literally rolled up on us, just drove up on us and hopped out and said, "What y'all out here doing?" And we looking like, we were just talking, like, what are you thinking? But if the relationship was there, they would know that we were just neighborhood kids who were just outside, hanging out and talking. Literally, we weren't doing nothing crazy. We weren't trying to vandalize anything or anything. We were just standing on, like, basically the sidewalk. And they just drove up on us. And that was kind of one of my first main introductions to law enforcement. It kind of was like, hey, you just gonna bother us while we weren't doing nothing. So, so I just feel like what you're saying, if that was there, that would have never happened. President Ahmad?
Yeah, I would say one thing is, as we've talked in Brother Crawford, Brother Shaw, Brother Pryor have all talked about how, we've ascended to these different leadership roles. So part of that, of those relationships, start with whoever the leader is, whether that is the chief of police, the sheriff, or the state attorney. So that person is the person who dictates the culture of their respective departments. And so if you have an expectation of the people who work for you, that your first obligation is service to your community, and that is something that is pushed and reiterated from the top, and accountability is a part of that, then if the public sees that the accountability starts within your own department, you are holding both yourself and the people who are under your charge accountable, then it's easier for the public to establish credibility with you, when you are saying things to them about their own accountability. And so, we try to tell people that this is a twofold conversation when we're talking about, how do we reduce crime, in different neighborhoods. Well, part of that is public policy, but the other part is personal responsibility. So that is a twofold thing, because in our communities, we can hold ourselves accountable and hold the people in our community accountable. Most times when crimes occur in our community, the people who live in the community know who's doing that. They know the people who are actually selling drugs, or know people who are the robbing crews and things in their neighborhoods. When things go awry in our departments, we as officers generally know those officers who are potential loose cannons. And so if you're in a leadership role, it is incumbent upon us in these leadership roles to not say, okay, I'm going to take the title, but not the responsibility that comes with the title. And so we have to establish a culture, and an expectation, coupled with accountability of the people who are under our charge. And then when we have those conversations with the community, they're more honest and open conversations, and it comes with a level of credibility, from us in the law enforcement ranks. That's at all levels. So if there's an officer in the, you have a district attorney or a state's attorney that are unwilling to prosecute, or even bring charges against that particular officer in cases that are, clearly egregious, then every time that happens, it erodes public confidence, in what we do in law enforcement. And so, when we teach this to people throughout the states, we generally tell people transparency is currency. So the more transparent you are about what's going on in your department, of course, you can't discuss certain personnel actions. But if a community sees that the leader of that department sets the tone and the culture for what they expect and how they expect their officers, or employees to act, it goes a long way with that bridging the gap with the community. So I think it's essential that officers in every sector, whether that be prosecutors or actually officers on the street, do what they can to establish those relationships with the community, so that when there is some type of unrest, then the first time you're meeting your chief of police is not when you're in the middle of a protest. So I think that these preventative things that we can do ultimately help us in our role, because if you look at some of the old police jargon is to serve and protect, and so that service is a key part of what law enforcement does, and a key part of what the law enforcement is charged with. And so that should be taken seriously, and making sure that the service is essential and at the forefront of what's done in the community.
Thank you. Rep Crawford, Attorney Shaw, anything you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you. I can add something briefly, because I think those two brothers touched on some really good things. And before I'd say my piece, let me kind of give you where I'm coming from, my background. So yes, I am an attorney with the DeKalb Law Department. In my role, I am one of the attorneys responsible for our public safety teams, which means I work with the members of the county that are employed by the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office, as well as the police department, to name a few. And so I work with law enforcement daily. That's whether I am protecting them from frivolous lawsuits or lawsuits that are not constitutional violations, but I'm also one of the attorneys that works on our appeal hearing. So what that means is if a police officer or sheriff employee does something wrong, they may be terminated, and I would help to ensure that that termination or disciplinary action is upheld. One of the things that I always say to employees, whether they are being suspended or fired for something that they do wrong on the job, is that you chose a career and chose a position in which the responsibilities that you have are going to be higher than the normal citizen. And if you're unable to maintain the integrity of that badge, the county, the department, then you shouldn't be working here. You are going to have to act in a way, because again, you are a public servant. And both of the brothers said this, you are a public servant. And if you are a public servant, then your job is to serve the people. And so you have to do the right job. You have to do the right thing. And you have to know that, again, you're held to a higher standard. For people who are elected, that are appointed, that have higher positions, you are put there to serve the general population. And when you are serving a large population, you cannot help the constituents that you don't see. So you have to make sure that you're out there during the work, yes, but also alongside the people, because that gives you a better understanding of the people that you are supposed to serve. You cannot serve if you can't see them. You can't understand the nuances of a community if you're not in the community and some of the challenges that people face and why people do certain things. You're not going to be able to stop every crime. You're not going to be able to prevent every accident from happening. But the more that you're out there, the better you understand the community and the people who put you in that position, and the better you will be for the people. And I like the fact that our elected officials, our chief of police and our DeKalb County sheriff, they do a lot in the community for that reason, because they want to better understand the folks that they're serving, but also they want people to know that they're human and that they want to form those relationships and not just be the person that comes around when someone has to get arrested or when someone is detained. But I'm here to actually help. I'm here to protect. More importantly, I'm here to serve.
Wow, that again, I honestly had no clue. I didn't know the full range of what what the position is as the assistant county attorney, but I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, so that definitely is some good insight. Attorney Shaw, anything to add?
I don't know what you expect me to add to that. That was about as good as I could hear. But what I will say is, if you think back to the protests around George Floyd and the treatment of people of color in police custody and different responses around the country and the way that some departments were able to navigate that and some weren't, I think the ones that were able to navigate that the best were the ones that had experience in the community, ties to the community, and were able to work in conjunction with the community to navigate that. You were able to see various responses to that, both successful and unsuccessful. And you can see the other panelists told you what you ought to be doing. And if you were doing it right, then it probably ended up in one way. And if you weren't doing it right, you ended up having a very volatile situation in your community.
Oh, whew, man. All right. All right. Well, to keep it going, I want to start back with Rep Crawford and you, Attorney Shaw. My next question is, how has the practice of law and the interaction with the community changed since the pandemic? Because of course, we all know that when the pandemic hit, the world hit a reset button, and we want to know how has things changed and how has the interaction been with the community since the pandemic? We can start with you, Attorney Shaw, and you, Rep Crawford. We can start with y'all two first, and then of course everyone can add in.
I mean, I would say that it has, I do more civil than I do criminal, but it's been good in some ways and bad in some ways. It has allowed us to have some efficiency and maybe some things that we all thought we had to do in person and things we all thought we had to do, face to face. Now we understand you can do it in a Zoom call. You can get everybody together and get it done more efficiently. But it did reduce your ability to interact with the community. And that is something that is coming back now. And you realize how necessary it was to be able to have that face to face, because you can't, have community ties via Zoom. You can't walk your community via Zoom. You can't make sure that your neighborhood leaders and your political leaders and your law enforcement leadership are all, on the same page via Zoom. You have to be together and in person, and to make sure that that relationship is fostered. So I think we're getting back to that, but it has certainly increased some efficiency of the court. I bet Brother Pryor would agree with that you can do some things quicker and a little bit more efficient, but still face-to-face is required for some things. So that's why I say I think it was good in some ways and bad in some ways.
And I'll add to that. I think that those are some really great points. So I don't want to repeat the points made by Brother Shaw. There are some things that I'll add. And I came from a plaintiff's background before working with my current job I've been here almost 4 years now. And speaking with people who are in the private sector that represent plaintiffs, I would hear them say that they believe some of their clients were taken advantage of because insurance companies understood that certain clients needed money, and they would lowball certain settlement offers, because if you didn't take that settlement, your case probably would not be heard for years. In terms of litigation, I did have a trial before the pandemic, and we tried to have one during the pandemic, and it got continued. There were some issues with the trial that we were going to have during the pandemic. It's tough to litigate when you're looking at TV screens or computer screens. You can't get the jury to really understand everything that's happened to your client. It's tough to tell the story through a computer screen. One thing that I think has been a positive, and it kind of goes to what we were saying in terms of law enforcement, and that is we see that everything, particularly George Floyd, God rest his soul, we see that everything should not be an arrestable offense. And what I think the pandemic helped people to understand more is that you arrest someone, you detain them, and they are in a jail. COVID is not the only disease that spreads throughout jails. Diseases, illnesses, and so many things happen while you're in jail that may not rise to the level of an Eighth Amendment violation. But when or if someone is impacted by something while they are detained, once they are no longer in custody, that can impact the community. And so what we saw during the pandemic were a lot of officers and sheriffs chose not to arrest people for minor violations. And if we can do that during the pandemic, because the reason was, well, we don't want to spread COVID. Well, you can also do that when we finally get a hold of COVID. Everybody doesn't have to be arrested. There are some things where you can be fined, or some things where it can be a lesson that you teach and move on. And so I think that's what we saw, or what many Metro Atlanta officers saw during the pandemic, is that a lot of people were no longer being arrested for these minor infractions. So I think that those two things benefited the community.
Yeah, I agree, especially the city of Atlanta and metro areas around Atlanta. You definitely started seeing a lot of those, a lot of that information pop up, saying some of the things that weren't, that people weren't, being, I'm sorry, that people weren't being arrested for. I know in Florida, in Tallahassee, I have a friend that works in law enforcement there, and he also told me that Tallahassee has some things as well that they just can't do anymore because of the pandemic. Here in Atlanta, I know for a fact, I personally know that I don't know if they still are doing it, but during the pandemic, I know that they stopped doing certain things as well with APD, to where they just don't bother you or don't arrest you unless it's something that's just completely crazy and out of hand. So yeah, I've definitely heard of all of the above, and I'm glad that those things have been put into place. Attorney Shaw.
Well, I was just going to say, but it also matters. That's why it matters who your state attorney is, because here in Hillsborough County, we had a state attorney who did some of those things, relaxed in what he was charged with and fined, and our governor removed him. And now we have an appointed state attorney who has reinstituted all of the things that were pre-pandemic and even gone a step further. So that is why you have to have people in office who are sensitive to these things and know what's going on. Because I'd much rather be under a state attorney prior administration here in Hillsborough County than the one I'm under.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Do you have anything to add, President Martin, state attorney prior?
I would say that one thing I think that that COVID did was protests were probably more robust because it was something that people could actually do and get outside. So I think that people participated more in active protests. But one of the recurring themes that I keep hearing is civic engagement. The who actually holds office matters. In Georgia, in our most recent election, there were close to 4 million people, maybe over 4 million people who voted in an off-year election. Now, obviously, we have a runoff, so that that engagement, has to be as robust, so that we make sure we have someone in office who actually is probably a rational thinker and speaker, but who actually holds office matters. And so when people say, well, voting doesn't matter, or why should I vote? It's simple. If voting didn't matter, why would someone go through all the trouble to stop you from doing it? And so I think that, law enforcement will continue to evolve. How we're actually addressed, as citizens will continue to evolve, but our voice is what actually makes that makes those changes. And so if you are in a district, where the voter engagement is high, then when you actually, say that you want to speak to the police chief or an elected official, it's more likely that you'll get a response. That doesn't start from simply going out in the street and protesting. You have to follow that up with, actually marching to the polls. So I think that COVID, actually got people out into the street and perhaps got people more engaged, so that people who didn't previously know about certain issues, probably had an opportunity to learn those things from peers once they actually participated, in some of those protests.
Rep. Crawford.
I'm sorry. Can I be heard? Sorry, I heard some interaction in the back. No, I totally agree. For the life of me, in just bring this thing full circle, I don't know how and why we are in a runoff with Herschel Walker being the opponent. I'm still blown by that. Nonetheless, it is very important who you elect, because the people who you elect are going to have different background experiences that are going to help certain people. And having someone who is the state attorney or the county attorney or the sheriff is going to be directly correlated with who gets arrested, why they're getting arrested, how long they'll be detained if they're arrested. And our liberties are really at stake. So I do agree with everything that the brothers just said. And that is, who you put into office is extremely important. And God knows, I hope that we put Raphael Warnock back in office, back in DC, because I think that he gets it. And so, yes, I don't have anything to add to that other than, it's very important who you get elected or who is elected.
State Attorney Pryor, was you going to add something?
Yeah, just briefly. Look, what we've heard the last 5 years in the criminal justice realm or arena is bond reform, right? Cash bail. The pandemic forced many jurisdictions, law enforcement agencies, the criminal justice system to look at bond reform and say, okay, it's not too unreasonable. At the very least, most jurisdictions, like my jurisdiction, we focus on low-level, non-violent misdemeanor offenses, right? So those offenses, we're not going to put a person in jail. They're not going to be placed on bond. We're going to let them free. We'll let them out, release them on their own recognizance. They'll have an ankle monitor, or they'll just have to report. And we find that the jail numbers are going down. The COVID numbers went down in the jails. This was practical. The pandemic, actually, there was a positive that came out of it. We're detaining less people, and we're not subscribing to a system, as my granddaddy would call it, as a system of the haves and the have-nots. If you have it, you getting out. If you don't have it, you're behind staying in. That is the cash bail system in America. Simply put, it's really not that complex. It's a system of the have and have-nots. The well-to-dos are the people that don't have the money to afford a defense or to get out. And so I think this was the practical nature of the pandemic. It actually forced us to look at our policies as law enforcement agencies, to look at our policies as a criminal justice system when we talk to our public defenders and our prosecutors and the judiciary.
Thank you for adding that, man. Again, this has definitely been a great conversation so far. We're down to our final questions. So I'm going to give one specific question, then I'm going to give a general question, then we're going to close it on out. So the one specific question that I had is, and again, this is going to go to Attorney Shaw and Rep Crawford. How does and of course everybody could chime in as well, but how does the state legislature play a part in making the change in the community? Like, how would that work?
Well, I wish Brother Crawford good luck. I think I heard that he just got elected, and I'm not elected. I got a vote, so I'm happy with my life right now. But I'll tell you, it's in every way. It is in everything we're talking about now goes back to the laws that the legislature passes. And so you may be in the minority or the majority, but all of this bond and mandatory minimums and, how police are represented by their even count, everything is legislative related. So these things are enormously important. Who you send to the legislature is extremely important because those people determine. It all comes back to the legislature. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. I remember when I was in the legislature, anytime someone was contemplating a new way for someone to get stopped by police, the entire Black caucus was against it. And oftentimes our colleagues would be like, they didn't understand why we were so against it. And we were just talking past each other. And listen, I'm not giving police another reason to stop Black people. And that was just something that I didn't think I was sent to the legislature to do. I didn't think that our criminal justice system was at a place that I needed to be a part of that and do that. And so I voted against kind of everything that gave police another reason to stop Black folks. And so that is why who you send there and having the diversity, not just of skin color, not just of gender, but of background and of experience. And so those of us that have been pulled over in questionable circumstances, those of us that know our people and how they have been pulled over and their sons and daughters and different things, we know that, unless it's a very special thing, I don't think that we ought to be giving brand new offenses that allow police to stop just for that particularly new offense. And so all these things come back to the legislature. All the rules that Harold Pryor has to, operate under, those are legislative. All the sentencing guidelines that the judge has to all of those things are legislative. And so you can do good things with that. But unfortunately, we live in Florida. And so you can also do very bad things with that. And so, just like, Representative Crawford and Harold were talking about all the good things that can happen from the pandemic and, the bond, cash bail and all those good things, you can also have a state attorney that believes something different and they can operate under a different set of rules. And then the legislation come and say, you know what, both of y'all are wrong. We think you ought to do it in the harshest way possible. And so it's just extremely important that we all understand how these things are in combination of each other. And it's if you have a legislature that wants to do good, they can do a lot of good. And if you have a legislature that wants to do bad, they can do a lot of damage.
Yeah. I echo a lot of things that were said. I will add that, yes, as a legislator, your job is to create the law. And that sounds simple enough. But if I elaborate, what I'd like to further explain is once you create the law, you essentially give the powers to state actors and agents, which Brother Shaw was just articulating. You give the power to police officers. I can give an example. In New York City a few years ago, Eric Gardner was approached and he eventually lost his life for something that I don't think he should have been approached for. If there was a law that said you can arrest someone for, or detain someone or search someone, their person, because of a scent of marijuana, and a cop does that, and that ultimately leads to a person's death, which we have seen a lot of times it's happened in the Black community, that officer may potentially be protected by what we call immunities. What a legislator has is the power to prohibit an officer or any other state agent from acting based upon a law that they may be able to draft. So if a person cannot be detained, searched, or arrested for marijuana possession, then that officer or any officer who does detain, search, or arrest someone for marijuana possession will not be protected by the law, and they will be penalized. So legislators have a lot of power. Historically, we have seen, as Brother Shaw said, legislators abuse that power. As the state attorney talked about the cash bail system and the criminal justice system and how at times in our history has been unkind to Black people, in time or in the past, you have had legislators who created the vagrancy system where Black people post-bellum, after they were released from slavery, essentially just by being Black, you can be arrested. And if you didn't have money for your bail, you were thrown right back into slavery by another name. So in the past, we have had legislators who have done things like that. In Georgia, currently, legislators have passed bills that restrict a woman's right to choose whether or not she wants to birth the child, or whether a teacher can teach something that is factual history, whether or not they can teach it based upon how a particular group of legislators feel. White legislators, let's be real. As the newly elected governor said in Florida, that's where woke goes to die, I believe. So you have people who believe that, hey, certain things should not be taught. Certain people shouldn't be able to do certain things. And if they can, or if they do, then we will restrict them from doing such, potentially criminalize it. And who are they criminalizing? Black people. Brother Shaw touched on something, and I'll finish with this. He discussed officers and whether or not officers should be able to arrest, and we don't want to have more opportunities to arrest Black people. Brother Shaw, we actually had something like that happen in DeKalb County, and I worked on some contracts with other metro, county, and city attorneys to increase technology initiatives. Because if we increase technology initiatives, and what we are doing is we are allowing our citizens to, or we are decreasing police interaction with Black people and officers, okay? And we are ensuring that whatever an officer said happens, we can look at portals and cameras in public places to make sure that that officer is actually telling the truth. So yeah, I agree that we want to restrict police interactions at times, and you can do that through the legislation, or through legislation that's passed. You can draft bills that protect people and not target people. And I think that's the importance of legislators, particularly Black legislators, because a lot of times Black people are the target of certain bills.
That definitely was well said. I think you all covered all all the bases, especially specifically speaking from a legislative standpoint. President Ahmad or State Attorney Pryor, is there anything you want to add?
Only that there are two things that will happen. To you, you will be either at the table or you will be on the menu. And so if you're not at the table, you are in fact on the menu. And so your vote puts you at the table, not voting puts you on the menu.
That was well said. We're down to our final question for everybody. Again, thank everybody for joining tonight to speak. But the final question that I have for everyone is: how do you suggest parents and schools become proactive with fostering relationships with law and with law, just law in general, in law enforcement, and also what advice would you give people that want to potentially become a lawyer or just go in a law enforcement period? So that two-part right there, go with everybody. We can start with State Attorney Pryor.
Yeah, so I'll say this. It goes two ways. We need law enforcement agencies and law enforcement leaders of these agencies, to be willing to initiate this because honestly, in our communities, there's a warranted and justified mistrust of the institutions in our criminal justice system. Not just the criminal justice system, but the legal justice system in general. Even in the civil aspect. Look at all the toxic tort cases and how that affects Black and Brown communities. Even in the personal injury, negligent security phase, all levels of the legal system, there's a level of mistrust in our Black and Brown communities. And so it's incumbent upon us, men and women like myself, who are leading agencies both in the law enforcement realm and the legal industries, to reach out to these communities and initiate some of these relationships. But also on the side of parents of Black and Brown youth, it's important for us to try to instill in our children that law enforcement, prosecutors, these institutions are supposed to work for us, even though they weren't designed to work for us. Now, we more so than ever, we have to demand that they do work for us, and we have to vote. As President Ahmad said, we have to vote. If you don't vote, you're on the menu, and I don't want to be on anyone's menu. And so I want to use every tool, all the powers at my disposal to ensure that I'm fighting and pushing for institutions to work for me, but to work for my people, to work for my family. And so it's important for parents to educate our children on how these systems work, how government works, how it's supposed to work for us, and to really instill in our children that there's a standard that law enforcement officers and prosecutors and judges should be held to, and they're held to a higher standard, and we should demand nothing less than that. But also, we should teach our children that not all prosecutors, not all law enforcement officers are bad people. There are really good law enforcement officers and prosecutors out there. And we just have to do a better job of weeding out the bad ones and stand up and call them out when they don't comport themselves to the standards that are required of people that are supposed to be protecting and serving us. And so I think that's the starting point. One, our agencies reaching out, the chiefs of those agencies reaching out, but also us as a community being willing to accept that, but also holding them to their standard and nothing less.
President Mott.
I would echo those sentiments. As I said earlier, those of us who are in leadership positions are and I say, for me, I have to say formally because I'm no longer in the law enforcement realm. But for those who are in those leadership positions, it is incumbent to establish, maintain an expected culture that starts with service first. And if we do that, then we will actually find ourselves in those communities, making those relationships as best we can, whether that be in schools or with the clergy, or with civic people who are involved in civic engagement in our communities. We should be establishing those relationships ahead of time so that when those things happen in our community, we know who to go to, to talk to, and we know how to bring those people together to make sure that those messages are credible messages and they're actually getting across to the communities that we serve. Every law enforcement officer that I've met is a human being. Some of those guys are and women are soccer coaches, football coaches, baseball coaches. Their kids go to the same school. In a lot of cases that the people in the communities that they serve go to. So we have to start with service first. We have to start with an established culture from the leaders of those departments, and then citizens have to be able to hold folks in leadership positions accountable for what they're doing, because ultimately the job of whether it's a law enforcement officer, whether it's a chief prosecutor, is to serve the people who put them in those positions.
Attorney Shaw?
Yeah, I'm gonna be quick. The schools, I think, are a really important place to start this, right? I think young kids need to see what a state attorney looks like, what they do. They need to see lawyers. They need to see public defenders. They need to see these things in front of them so they know that, Representative Crawford talked about getting the confidence to know that I can do this, or getting the confidence to say, look, a lawyer came into my office or came into my classroom, and maybe that's what I want to do. I really like the idea of going into the schools and giving talks to these young men and women and allowing them to see and touch and feel what a state attorney is, what a state rep is, what a law enforcement officer is. Just like we need more African-American judges and state attorneys and public defenders and legislators, we need more Black law enforcement officers, President Ahmad. So I think that same thing applies to going into the schools so they can see an example of what that is, and giving our children a chance to see that as realistic, viable ways to go.
True.
And I'll add to that, in kind of following exactly where Brother Shaw came off. Imagery is important, and a child or an adult will learn what it is that they may want to do or don't want to do once they're exposed to it. So exposure is powerful, and it's important. And one of the things that I like about a particular political figure in DeKalb County, what he said to me is, Omari, I'm going to be aggressive with my service. It is my job to go to the schools. It's my job to go to the churches, because I don't want the first time that people know about me is at a meeting, at a board meeting, or where I'm being fussed at because the constituent doesn't agree with what I've done or I haven't done. And what I think has been helpful for me with my own personal life is that, and I want to continue to do this, I think being aggressive can help because you can educate. There are so many different political roles, elected officials, and sometimes those lines get blurry on what each official has the capacity or the authority to do. So not only do I think it's helpful to learn about the people and the problems that you're serving, but I also think if you're in the schools, that can help to educate our young students and give them that civic lesson that they definitely need, because a state rep may not be able to fix the pothole. Maybe you need to go to your commissioner or to your city councilman. The governor, as we just saw in 2020, I mean, we've seen it in the era of Jim Crow, where, the president didn't create Jim Crow. That was governors, right? Or in 2020, most recently, the president can't tell a state governor to wear a mask. The governor has the authority to do this. So I think if people are learning this at a young age, we will not only understand, perhaps maybe I can want to be the governor one day, or a police chief, because I've learned about this at a young age, but also it teaches them who and why they need to vote. And so that goes back to what every brother said about, state attorney said you're either on the menu or you're at the table. At an early age, if you understand the positions and what they entailed and what authority that each political person has, then you may tailor your votes accordingly. You may become more involved because of what you learn. So I think being inside of our schools is important, because that's the foundation where we can teach them at an early age. This is why voting, this is why being involved, civic responsibility, civic engagement, this is why it's important. And I think as leaders, we need to be aggressive in how we get in front of these classrooms.
Wow. Whew. Again, yeah. Again, that was a great note to end it on. I don't think there's nothing else that could be said. I think you all pretty much laid it out completely tonight, man. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching. And again, I also want to thank the panelists. I want to thank every single last one of you for taking the time out of your very busy schedules, because I know your schedules are crazy hectic. Just, given everything that you all have going on. So I do truly want to give a sincere thanks and appreciation from the 100 Black Men of South Metro Atlanta and also the Myriad 100 Mentor Program for you all coming to facilitate this today. We're going to have closing remarks. We're going to have President Ahmad give the official closing remarks, and then I'm going to send everybody off. So just a real quick fire closing remarks. We can start with you, State Attorney Pryor.
Well, for the sake of time and it's bedtime for my kids, I thank you all for having me, and I hope we continue this dialogue and ensuring that we continue to just have these discussions so we can have a better world for our children and Black and brown communities around this country.
Thank you. Attorney Shaw?
Yeah, this was very interesting, even to just be a panelist and hear these other brothers, state rep and law enforcement, and Brother Pryor. This was really fascinating to me, and I hope we continue this too. This was interesting to hear from all these sides. So thank you for having me. It was great to be here.
Great. Rep Crawford?
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. These discussions are necessary. These are some really bright brothers, so just listening to them helps to give me some things to think about and build upon. So thank you for that. It's important to vote. We got to get Warnock back in. Can't say that enough. So thank you very much for having me, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And President Ahmad, go ahead and close us out.
Well, gentlemen, thank you guys for taking your time to participate in this discussion. I think, as the brother said, these discussions are extremely important. It informs our community. They hear some meaningful dialogue, and I think this can only help in shaping what our communities look like moving forward. So I hope this is the first of many conversations that we have on topics like these. And as you can see, these topics allow us to explore a number of different areas. So thank you, for your time. Thank you for all of those who took the time to tune in and who stuck with us through the discussion, and look forward to more discussions like these in the future. But Jerry, you on mute.
My bad. I'm sorry. Again, my bad. Again, everyone, thank you all for joining. And again, continue to follow our YouTube page. And again, thank you to all the panelists who joined tonight to speak. Thank you for taking time out your busy schedule to speak. With that being said, everyone have a great night.